Hello, my name is Elaine Leeder, and this is a podcast called From Despair to Repentance: Jews, Spirituality, Prisons, and Restorative Justice. This program is sponsored by the Institute for Jewish Spirituality and Society, where I am a fellow. The mission of IJSS is to advance scholarship, social transformation, bringing Jewish spiritual knowledge to bear on the toughest challenges of contemporary society. We break down barriers between spheres of knowledge and practice, enabling long-term collaboration among scholars, social researchers, and human service practitioners. Please visit us at www.ijss.org to find out more about what we do. In my capacity as a fellow, I've been speaking around the country about restorative justice using a Jewish spiritual lens. However, this is my second year doing podcasts in which we bring you people who are engaging in the work on the ground with real people, but imbuing what they do with the spiritual practice. To that end, tonight I have my very good friend and co-facilitator, Dr. Noel Amherd, who I facilitated dialogues with him, work with him in many prisons throughout California. And with that, I would like Dr. Ammer to please introduce himself, and then we'll get to some questions. You're
Thank
on.
you so much. Thanks so much, Elaine. Hi. Yeah, and please, Noel is good. Thank you. Yes, you and I have done a lot of work together in prisons and with VODs. My work began in with victim offender dialogues and restorative justice, actually through San Quentin, where I had been attending some of the symposiums that were organized by the men in blue inside, who were part of the restorative justice program there. And it brought together people from the inside together with those brothers in the outside, in the inside. And so we would spend the day together. And it was the first one I ever attended was one of the most amazing experiences I ever had. And one of the funniest things that maybe people who've never been to an event like that, it's hard to imagine, is that after the day spent together and the kind of trust and authenticity and accountability that's built, nobody from the outside wants to leave. The funniest thing. And I remember that feeling very, very strongly myself. I felt like I was leaving people behind as I was ushered out. And it's a discomforting feeling. But but to give a bit of history to myself, I have from a very young age, I felt like I was very um, attentive to the land around me. I spent a lot of time outdoors. Um, I, at a young age, started to practice falconry, which is the ancient art of hunting with hawks and falcons. Um, and then when I was a teenager, it was in my third year of high school, my father died, and that really really was a pivotal moment for me in my life. And I feel like going to land was something that provided solace and acceptance to me. And so I felt like what was a relationship to even ancestors. I don't have ancestors, so to speak, that go back generations on this land. And yet, as a young person, there I was, and felt um, I felt the presence, and that there was some kind of holding and solace, like I mentioned, for that. And so, as I continued in my life, in my early 20s, I had come across through a friend of mine um, a tradition that comes out of West Africa from the Yoruba people of Nigeria. Sometimes it's called Orisha, sometimes it's called Ifa, other times it's called Isheshe, but it is essentially the indigenous traditions of the Yoruba people prior to missionization and colonization. Um, there was something about that that just clicked. for me. And that was something that I pursued. And then at in 1995, I was able to make a trip over to Nigeria where I went through an initiation for one of the lineages of practice that's called Ifa. Um, and so I was asked to be what is called a Baba Lawo, which translates to a father of the mysteries. Um, and I've been studying and working ever since. And so the reason I even bring that up is as a sometimes in America and diaspora will be called an Ifa priest. It was in those San Quentin restorative justice symposiums that I was asked to provide a Yoruba prayer because these were events that also included all the religious groups that were inside the prison. And as somebody who had learned to speak Yoruba, um, after I had given that prayer, several of the brothers inside had come and asked me if I might consider coming in because they wanted to practice this tradition, but they didn't have any guidance. And so I agreed. And what that became was actually a weekly, um, a weekly visit with by me for 8 years that I went in and had an amazing, amazing group of men inside San Quentin, all of whom, except for two, are now home, which was one of our goals. Um, and we're all still in contact, and we stay in connection and support of one another through this practice. So, jumping back, one other piece that falls into this is that in the late '90s, after being a carpenter and then having children and so on and so forth, I realized I'm going to need to do some other things in my life, and I returned to school. And so then I did a master's in anthropology, focused on Yoruba culture, and then I ended up going and completing my doctoral work in the UK with Karen Barber, who's quite well known within the field at the Center of West African Studies at the University of Birmingham in the UK. So I bring all these pieces together. I feel like in my life, it's an odd, non-linear path, but in that way, I feel like it actually provides something very rich and fruitful for me and for those who I can share what I've been able to receive with them. Um, so I'll stop there and
Okay,
please
thank
jump
you.
in.
That's a great introduction. And so, how is it then that you morphed into doing dialogues and restorative justice from running the groups and being with the men in the religious circles?
Thank you. So the way that I came into the dialogues was I had been involved in restorative justice at this point through particularly schools, working predominantly with middle schools and high schools. Um, but actually, one of the desires on my part, even after receiving my training and doing this work for a number of years, was always to be able to um, I really wanted to kind of go into some of these hardest places. Um, there's something about those spaces that I think partly from knowing death several times as a young person that is familiar to me in that darkness, and it doesn't frighten me. There's a certain allure to it, and I think part of that allure is actually the healing that that sits as a sort of promise in the places where there's the most pain. And so I had become a part of a collaborative that was in Oakland, California. And that enabled me to be able to start to work in victim offender dialogues. And so I had done several, and in the meantime, like I shared, I was now going into San Quentin every week, and I was working with a group of men. And it turned out that one of the men in my group, in fact, whom you've interviewed, Elaine, Robert Ortiz. He had a letter that he had received from his victims, and that had begun a kind of journey that unfolded leading up to his own victim offender dialogue um, with the family who he had harmed. And that was something that you and I had gotten to do together, which was really profound transformation and healing, which continues even to this day. Um, his was the first of all of my victim offender dialogues that was not a case of murder. And his was a kidnapping. So um, to me, I bring that up to say that one of the things that I find most interesting about murder situations is that there's someone who actually is bringing everyone together in the situation, but who isn't present physically with us. And there's a way sometimes that can become overlooked, and there's a lot of attention that's put on the living, and those who aren't with us, the dead, get neglected, and so they're talked about. But one of the things that I find really fascinating in our spiritual work, and again, I think this is probably common throughout all traditions, is the dead are not just gone, and that in cases of harm, severe harm such as this, not only I think do the living need something, but don't then the people who've been killed need something. And that opens up this particular kind of dialogue and relationship itself that's also very healing amongst everyone who's involved.
Could you elaborate on that? I mean, I do remember one case in which we worked together,
Mm,
and but you could speak to any cases in which the dead are brought present during
mhm.
dialogue in some form.
Right. I like to think of of the dead, of ancestors, as ongoing relationships rather than metaphors or symbols or a psychological experience. Um, Much in the same way that we might think about starlight, and that when we look up at the night sky, the starlight we're seeing itself may be thousands or millions of years old. And yet, there we are looking at it, twinkling, and it is our present. And so, in the same way, I think that ancestors and the dead are like starlight in the sense that the relationship is present now. The effects are not over. The inheritances are still awake and alive. They're still nurturing or telling or even hurting. And the healing that so many of us need is a healing and a hurting that was passed on to us that never itself got healed. So in these situations, rather than sort of pushing um, people who have died to the margins, or you know saying in some sense, well, they're just gone, and so we will talk about them while we talk to each other. One of the this It's a small shift, but it's really qualitatively significant, is to say, well, what if we were to talk to them rather than about them? Because aren't they also owed something? And the funny thing that I've always experienced is that um, in the times during a dialogue that I brought this up, the first person who immediately understands that is the person who has taken their life. Um, and a quick word I'll say about that is that's um, a phrase that we hear a lot. That's kind of a cliche that we say, that somebody took a person's life. And I think one of the things we want to recognize that is that when we kill, not only do we take their life, their living, but we also take their death. We take their dying. Each of us is born unto the death of our own life, the end of our own living. And there's a way in which that dying is designed to be a kind of nourishment that feeds that which will live on beyond us. And so when we take someone's dying along with their living, we have starved something that otherwise would have been fed. And so now there's accountability necessary there as well. There's a kind of repair, there's a kind of paying forward, there's an amends somehow, right? Where suddenly the past and us in the present as the living and those who will come after are now immediately strung together in a kind of generational need. And if we don't meet that need, there are things at stake, right? We know the consequences of harms that have been done in the past. It's sitting amongst us presently now, all over the world, and certainly, Elaine, in the conversation that we're having now.
Well, it reminds me well of when we're doing dialogues and the person who did the harm brings the person into the room who they have
Mm-hmm.
killed. And they'll
Right.
say, I'm living my life today for, and they give their name. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're often talking about the person. And, you might not know this, but we interviewed Melissa, who
Mm-hmm.
and I did a dialogue with,
Yeah.
and she talks a lot as the daughter of the victim um,
Mm-hmm.
about the generational harm, the trauma she carried, the healing she's doing now as a result of the process, and the person who did the harm getting soon to get out and continuing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm glad you're bringing them into the dialogue right now because we never in so far in my discussions we've never done this kind of deeper looking
Mm-hmm.
at it. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, why don't you tell me some of the detail? Well, first of all, do you work with any organizations now? And even if you don't, give us some details of some of the more profound cases that you've experienced.
Right. So, um, just given the conditions that we're living under, um, a lot of the restorative justice work that I've been doing has not been able to continue itself because of lack of funding or funding that's been cut. Um, so, in the meantime, as an effort to continue and also expand, I've created a nonprofit organization with a colleague of mine. It's called Beholden Land Ancestors Accountability. You can find us at thebeholden.com. Our effort and interest is to be able to stand on those three pillars: land, accountability, and ancestors, um, as an effort to try to bring healing um, to the conditions that have brought us to such crisis in the world currently. Um, and we want to be able to focus our work with youth, with people in recovery, with formerly incarcerated people. Um, if we're able, it could even expand, into prisons. So people who are currently incarcerated, but then also we want to be able to work with everyone, um, because so much of the work that's needed is a sort of rethinking, kind of like we're doing with ancestors in the moment, rethinking what we've been taught through a kind of inheritance of modernity, if I may, that teaches us to kind of push many things to the side in favor of thinking of ourselves as autonomous, to be in control, to always have progress. Technology is going to save us, and so on and so forth. And it's almost these days, it's like saying that what we're going to do is we're going to get saved by getting more of the stuff that got us here into this condition. Right? And so we know what that's going to do. So it's about being able to shift, being able to shift our understandings of even ourselves, our modernist identities, even that may be inheritances, but that are also perpetuations of harm. So I think to answer your question, one of the profound um, kind of understandings and experiences and expansions of what we're talking about was through the dialogue that we had with Robert Ortiz. And even with Melissa, who you brought up, where again, part of the understanding is that when each of us comes to the time of our own dying, there's often a question which maybe we haven't thought about until that time. To me, that question is, um, when I die, into whose faces will I look? And those faces will be all those peoples from whom I come. And I make it plural on purpose. I always encourage people, if you say a singular noun, see what happens if you make it plural. And we all come from so many peoples, and we often will pick one or two, and we often treat them like mirrors. But there are a lot of peoples whom we come from who are our ancestors who may not look like us. And we can pose questions to this as a way of wondering about accountability. Questions like, what about me is recognizable to my own ancestors?
Hmm.
What about me makes me desirable to them? What about me makes me someone who they want to claim as a descendant? As much as I ask the question, well, who of them and what have they done that makes me want to claim them as ancestors? And it's not ultimately a choice. We are all descendants, and we all have ancestors. None of it's by choice. And what do we do? What do we do with the horrors that are as much a part of all of our lineages as the beauties and the love?
Could
And
I speak to that? Because I'm thinking now in terms of tying it to IJSS, that
mhm,
many of us, myself included, come from where children of survivors and refugees,
mhm,
pogroms and immigration and trauma and contemporary violence. And
mhm,
we are the reflection of all of that, carrying the historical pain as well as the historical strength of survival. And I think of it often because I myself see myself as a memorial candle for my murdered aunt, uncle, and grandmother who were shot in a village in Lithuania. And so as you talk about this, it seems it's relevant to all of us. We all come
mhm.
with this kind of heritage and background and trauma and strength and beauty and the whole conglomeration,
Right.
complexity, if you will. So,
Right.
how do you address that in a venue?
Hmm. It's some of the work that's why I say some of the work that I did with Robert was really powerful and revealing. I mean, it was an exploration almost and a experimentation um, around these issues because you know his willingness to be accountable, and this is true for any of us because on some level we're also all complicit in harms, much as we might not want to be. Sometimes just by virtue of being citizen enables our complicity in horrors we don't want to be complicit in. But the maturity of saying, okay, I'm living in this condition that's bigger than me, and I don't have power to change it at will. And yet, how do I take responsibility? Not guilt, not shame, but responsibility. And so, Robert is saying, okay, at one point in my life, and in a kind of mentality that I was in, I had done harm. I'm at a different place. I'm a different person. And of course, he met with his victims and they made amends. But one of the things that happens, of course, is he's saying within the tradition then that we're practicing, he's looking at his ancestor and he's saying, what have I done? What have I done to them? What are they thinking where they say, what have we done such that one of our own would act like that?
Mm.
And so how does he make amends to his ancestors? Such that on the day he dies, he can show up amongst them with them wanting to bring him in, to add him to the lineage of belonging.
So my
And
question is, how do you make those kinds of amends? I mean, it's
I,
very concrete.
It is. Uh, well, I'm going to add one more dimension
Please,
to it, which
please.
is the really the same thing happens when we do harm to other people. Because what we've done is we have affected their lives in such a way that we have harmed their ancestors.
Hmm.
And what happens is that then my ancestors, let's say, and people whose the ancestors of those I've harmed are now woven together, not by choice and in pain.
Hmm.
Because pain, as we know, when we harm each other, we become inextricably woven together in ways that need healing and amends. Not that we're ever going to sort of be disentangled, but so that where that entanglement is going to persist, and we need it to become something that is solace, that is medicine, and that becomes the work. Certainly, it becomes a work that we have to do as the living. There is some fundamental truth that as we heal our ancestors.
Hmm.
There's something about being here in this world that wherever it is that they are, they can't do. There's something in this world, our agency, our capacity to to interact in the way that we do amongst the world of the living
Hmm.
that they're unable to do, but they are so interested
Hmm.
because when we heal, they heal. And so we receive, and that's the dynamic of the relationship. That's why I say this is just metaphor. It's not just symbols. It's not all up in our heads, right? These are dynamic relationships in which we're inheriting that starlight, like I mentioned before, and shining and reflecting it back.
Hmm. Hmm. May I share with you an experience that
Please.
I had that speaks exactly to that?
Mm,
For most of my youth, I've carried the psychological wound of my family being killed,
mm,
feeling as if I had was falling into a pit. They died in a pit in
mm,
Lithuania. And I went to visit that spot many years ago, but was not really healed by being there. But a couple of months afterwards, I did a spiritual journey and fell with visualization into the pit
mm,
and went. And I was scared where I was going. But
mm,
I came out into a light and I met my deceased ancestors.
mm,
And they told me that they had healed, that it was
mm,
75 years later, that the world had tried to make amends, that I was
mm,
making amends, and that they were at peace, and that I could be. And so
mm, mm,
I totally understand. I mean, I'm only thinking one generation back
mm,
rather than all the
mm.
others. But it's a concrete example of what you're talking about in terms of making amends and making
Absolutely.
peace and sort of healing and taking it beyond the trauma of it.
Hmm. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's not a simple thing. It's often it's maybe more question than certainty. Um, and maybe also to answer your question more directly is it takes a certain kind of gesture and etiquette, let's say we might that that is maybe we call it people call it ritual. What I like to think of as ritual is it's a gesture of relationship of accountability. So, again, rather than thinking of this all as, just in our heads and metaphors, if we continue to emphasize the idea of relationship, then the questions really become, what does this relationship ask of me? What is needed because of the connection that's holding us together? This is a question we can ask of anything actually, because certainly the crises of our world are ones that ask us to ask these questions. You can have this relationship with water. In fact, we better have this relationship with water because what does this relationship ask of me? If I poison the water, well, I'm poisoning myself and I'm poisoning the world around me. And so there's reciprocity in any relationship, right? There's need, there's balance. And when we get out of balance, that's when the relationship is asking for a kind of amends to restore balance, to transform heat, what would be toxic into medicine.
Uh-huh.
And that becomes the dynamic with with any of the relationships that we have, whether it's with humans, whether it's with the dead, whether it's with the other than humans. All of the residents, just to tie it into another thing, I told you that I was a falconer. Well, I'm still doing falconry. It's one of the solaces in my life. And yet, I have a 14-year-old Harris Hawk, and what I have witnessed over the years with her is a kind of devastation to landscape. I see fields that get turned into strip malls or suburban housing, stretches. And what I see is the loss of all these the plants, the biodiversity. I see the loss of the jackrabbits, the cottontails, the coyotes, the wild turkeys, the waterfowl that live there, the snakes. Like we don't think about the lives who are resident in that ecosystem, and we're just lost when we bulldoze. And one of the I hold the relationships that falconry teaches us is that it's it's not about me and the bird. It's about me, the bird, and the world.
Mhm.
Because without a healthy ecosystem, the two of us have nothing to do together.
Mhm.
And she is left in a position of being unable to be herself, and
Mhm.
she can't feed herself because there's nothing out there. And that's one of the things that I see. And so that relationship is one that that is to me reveals this deep interconnectedness. This in the tradition that I'm a part of, in Yoruba is called Ashuada. It's a spirit. In that case, it would actually be called Alashuada. It's the spirit of togetherness in which creation was formed. We can't extricate one another from each other.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's in the coming together and the recognition of the entanglement and the sort of web, right, that holds us together, that we put our attention to be able to maintain health, to be able to maintain balance for the goodness of all things. The goodness is brought out of the wholeness of a healed interconnectedness. And
Mhm.
what we're seeing now, of course, is the opposite. But in that opposite, it shows us even more strongly how much that is what we have to repair and to
Right.
bring back.
Now, I know you've recently written your second book, and I'm wondering
Mm.
if it's related to this path that you've been on,
Hmm.
and what is it, and what's it about, if you can,
Thank you.
tell me, right?
Thank you. Yeah. So I've published now what will be two books with Africa World Press. This book is very different than my first one, which was much more analytic, academic. This is one that I is like a graphic novel, but it's based on the oral texts of the Yoruba traditions, and so I call it a graphic recitation. And um, it's all the artwork is done by me by hand. There's nothing digital done, and the story is following a child who yearns to be able to fly and runs into a spirit who says, "Okay, I've heard you. Here's some wings. You get to be a bird for one day." And so then the wisdom and there also the responsibility through wisdom that the child acquires through that experience. Um, the book itself functions on multiple levels. When you get it, you'll see because I've grounded it in this kind of oral recitations of the Yoruba culture, which get quite complex. But it's anyone can enjoy it because the images allow you to just explore the imaginative space of the child transforming. And then if you want to go deeper, there are more layers, the literary layers that are happening through the narrator and the story that's being narrated. So um, I hope to have this out in the end of April, and it's called Wings of Ashua. And so it is exactly what we were talking about. It's based on the idea of the creation molded in togetherness, into interconnectedness.
Uh-huh.
Um,
I
mhm,
love this conversation. You're taking us to places we've not gone in this podcast.
mhm.
Is there
Right.
any, we're going to wrap up soon, but I wonder if there's anything that you might like to say or wrap up with before we close. Something you'd like to
Thank you. Mhm.
say. That's all.
Uh, to close, I think a couple of things. One um, is to consider the conversation that we've had today. Consider the harms that we've all inherited, and that it's not just about us. Even our pains, we can ask questions about whose pain is this? When is this pain? And to therefore be willing to look at the entanglement of connections and relationships that we're in life, um, with a willingness to explore what it asks of us so that we can heal, not just ourselves, but in that reciprocal, responsible sense of healing everything around us. Um, and so, to that, on a very mundane level, like I said, I've started this nonprofit. I would really welcome people to go check out our website. As I said, it's thebeholden.com. I have a course coming up in April on ancestral accountability. A lot of what we were just discussing tonight, and it will be online for 3 2-hour sessions, and we'll be exploring this in a restorative kind of circle process, and doing the work and exploring the work at a sort of beginning level. How do we do this? How do we find our way, feeling into the dark of ancestry and harm, not just our own ancestry, but then the way that we become connected through multi generations to all peoples around us. So, yeah, visit the website, sign up for the class, get the book. You'll hear about that coming out in the end of April, and bring healing to the world.
Marvelous, fabulous conversation, Noel. And once
Thank
more,
you.
how do we reach you in case people want to? Do you have a beside the website? Do you have an email maybe you could share?
Best thing, you can reach me through the website. There's a contact page, and that'll come to
And
to
it's
me, and I will
Beholden,
be able to respond to you. Thebeholden.com. The Beholden.
Beholding.
B D E N THE BEHOLDEN. Thebeholden.com.
Got it. Thank you. All right,
Absolutely.
Noel, thanks for a wonderful conversation
Thank you so much. It's
again.
great to be in conversation with you again, Elaine. I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
Thank you.